Hello, everyone. We're getting ready to get started. They're piling in here, Sarah. They're about ready.
Oh, I had to unmute myself. I was saying, yay. Hello, everyone.
We got Joni on, Joni Sanderson. We've got Sylvia and Paula. Hello, hello, Nancy, Catherine.
Are you guys excited? I'm excited. We get to go over all the fun stuff today.
Yeah. I'm excited. I know generally what you're going to cover, but I'm excited to actually see this come to fruition after talking about it for a long time, right?
Yes. Hopefully it's fun and educational and, you know, all those things.
It will be.
Alrighty. Let me switch mic. Hold on one second. Okay. All right. Well, welcome, guys. This is our first course for Quilt-In-The-Hoop 101. I want to make sure. Okay, I am unmuted. I was getting a little nervous because it was showing me that Aubrey was muted. Okay, so like I said, it's our first course of Quilt-In-The-Hoop 101. I hope you guys are as excited as I am because we are going to go through the course guide in detail today and really cover three main things. And then at the end, we're going to stitch our block. And the block that we're going to stitch is called our basic block. That is this one right here. This one I used wool in, so it has a lot of dimension. We're going to talk about wool today. There's battleizer in here. Come on in here, Annie. And water soluble thread. Those are really the three big things that I think of when I think of things that you'll need or want to really be able to stitch a beautiful design of ours.
We're going to explain why you need some of this.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. So, you're getting savings alerts on your phone.
Oh,
okay. Well, I asked Annie to join us for these courses because she is a co-founder of HoopSisters. So we're going to start with making Annie tell us a little bit about her background in the sewing industry and kind of how you got started.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to think how far back I want to go. I used to be an educator for sewing machine manufacturers. So we would travel all over the place and we teach classes and go to trade shows and do all that fun stuff too. And we had to come up with our own classes. So that's kind of my background. But prior to that, it was my sister, the other HoopSisters co-founder, who taught me how to digitize. And she taught me how to make my first little quilt. It was just a 9-patch. It was just basically a pillow cover.
Yeah.
And then I learned to digitize from her. That went on to work for a sewing machine manufacturer. And while doing that, I thought there's got to be a way that you can make a quilt in the hoop. It's just seams.
Right.
Flip it over and stitch it.
Right.
So Linda and I and a bunch of friends were at a retreat that we go to. We actually were in Paducah, Kentucky for the show that they have there every April. And while we were there, I was stitching out a project for my employer. And she then started digitizing a project that I think she may still have it hanging in her house, but she used it for a class in her store. So I took my project and I went out and taught different places in the country. And Linda was teaching it in her store. They were getting rave reviews, her and I both, because it was something new that people had not done before.
Right.
So it was kind of fun.
Because before HoopSisters, you couldn't take a design like this and make this in the hoop of your embroidery machine.
Right.
That was not going to happen.
Right. And the funny part too about it is when Linda was teaching it in her store, when we first started the machines, the biggest hoop was like a 5x7 hoop. So the biggest block you could make was 5x5. And it was kind of funny because Linda had a comment. One of her customers said to her, maybe she's watching, I don't know. She said, well, why are we doing this if it's only this big? So now we're excited because the hoops keep getting bigger.
They're up to 10
They
inches now.
They are.
Maybe
They're up
bigger.
to-
I'm not sure.
know. I'm sure they probably are. Rectangular and up and down wise, they are definitely bigger, but width wise, I think our blocks so far are just 10 inches wide is the widest that we have.
And I know Aubrey said Joni Sanderson is watching.
Yeah.
And Joni is working on Navigator right now. Probably a lot of other things too.
Probably.
But I think Joni might have been she might be doing a 10-inch block with Navigator. I don't remember. I might have that wrong. So sorry if I do, Joni.
Yeah.
But
if not, I think Sarah thinks you should.
But like I said, it goes up to 10 inches now. So with a lot of our designs, you can get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10-inch options. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Right.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So your background is really being an educator for a sewing machine company.
Right.
And then Linda and her husband, they own two, they are dealers of 2 stores in Carpentersville and Woodstock, Illinois. And I know that in our course guide, it tells you, if you've read it, that one of her favorite classes to teach is digitizing.
Yeah, it is.
So,
So she was a good teacher. She taught me and I actually picked it up, which was kind of amazing.
And it's very fun to do. And then it's fun to see what it looks like once you've actually created it.
It is. So I think Linda and Dwayne have been in business for 30 some years. Maybe she's watching and maybe she can comment or text to Aubrey and Aubrey can jump in and tell us exactly how long, but her and her husband in business for quite a while.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Well, now that they know the background, let's we're going to dive into some of the material that we're going to cover. Okay. And the 3 big things today are battleizer, whether or not you'd use wool in something and what that might do to your block, and pros and cons of using it in different designs. And then what is water soluble thread and why do you use that? Those are kind of the big questions that we typically get. So why don't you start with telling them what battleizer is? And I'm going to pull up Facebook and check for comments.
Okay, sounds good. Battleizer, it is basically a combination of batting and stabilizer. And I have a little piece of it here. So here is you really can't tell a lot unless you're here to touch it, but this is our battleizer. It's like I said, a combination of batting and stabilizer. So it's super thin, so that it goes in your hoop very, very easily. And it also, their fabric on the back, if you're putting your backing on while it's in the hoop, it kind of clings to your battleizer as well. And it was funny because we found the product that we wanted. Linda and I did while we were at a spring quilt market in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I can remember us in the hotel room. We were just laughing and giggling and trying to figure out a name for our battleizer, our batting that we wanted. And we're like, well, it's batting. No, it's stabilizer. No, it's battleizer. So you got them. It might not be funny to you right now, but it's 2 sisters.
But it's late
in a hotel room. It's late at night and you're excited about something. It was hilarious at the time.
That's kind of, I know us here at Hoop Sisters, when we create a design, then we go back after we kind of finish it oftentimes and we're like, what do we call this? And sometimes that's the hardest part with some of our designs.
Giving them names like Navigator, Freshly Picked,
and Joni said I was wrong. She's making the 5-inch. Somebody else in the group is doing the 10-inch.
She'll probably make 2 5 inches. That adds up to 10.
Quick,
so maybe we're
she?
right.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Our battleizer comes in 5-yard packages, and that's what this looks like. And it also comes in a 15-yard bolt of it. And both of them are 25 inches or 24 inches wide.
So if you hoop it right, you can really get 2 hoops at least across those 24 inches.
Yep.
And if you're doing a 5-inch block, you can probably get 3.
Absolutely. You get 3. But
go ahead.
when you go to trim your blocks, you're going to take it all out of the hoop and you're going to trim that battleizer away. If you save that battleizer, Sarah's going to show you a little trick that you can do.
Yeah, if you save your scraps. So typically when I'm trimming my block, I kind of end up with a bunch of scraps that are all about the same length, right? And same size. If you save those, you can make what we call Frankenbat. So Frankenbat is where you're going to take 2 pieces of battleizer, and I hope this is translating on camera, but I took these 2 pieces of battleizer and I just took a wide zigzag stitch on my regular sewing machine and stitched these 2 together. And so what I can do with this is I can reuse those scraps by just putting this right back in my hoop, which I'm actually, when we stitch the 5-inch block today, we're going to do it on this Frankenbat. So I think that's awesome because you can stretch the use of it, obviously, so you can get a lot more blocks. And I've got so many scraps I wasted away. I should start doing this more often.
I think I need to get Haley in here and teach her how to do Frankenbat. She can just sit for
Haley is Aubrey's 11-year-old daughter. So she might actually like that.
I think she would.
But oh goodness, I just lost what I was going to say.
Talking about Battleizer?
Yeah.
Now saving Frankenbat? Well, let's move on.
I don't remember. If I remember it,
you'll find it.
So next, what we were going to talk about was water soluble thread. So water soluble thread. That's one of the most common questions we get is, why do you use water soluble thread?
Why would you want to sew something and have it dissolve?
Right. Oh, it came back. Oh, yes, it did. Frankenbat. In your course guide, if you pull it up on your computer, there is a link in there that's clickable, and you can click that and you can see kind of a step-by-step video. Hopefully I linked that right. A step-by-step video for how to do the Frankenbat if what I just showed doesn't quite make sense. So that was the thought that I lost, and that just came back to me.
I knew it would. We just had to move on.
So back to water soluble thread. What is it?
Well,
take a guess.
Thread that dissolves when it gets wet.
Yes. And why would you use that?
We would use that because a lot of times when you stitch in your block in the hoop, you're going to tack down the edges of it because that gives you something to trim against. And if you were to use regular thread when you did that basting stitch, and then you sewed that to the block next to it, if you didn't get your seam exactly perfect, you would have to pick out all that thread. But if you use water soluble thread, you would not have to do that. You just have to get it wet. And I'm not sure whether this is going to show or not, but hopefully you'll be able to see this. But you can see some darker thread there right in the seam.
And this is an example that we made where I just used a regular polyester thread for all the basting stitches. So if you don't have water soluble thread, or if for some reason you didn't want to use it and you used a polyester thread, you would see all those basting stitches in that seam. And I don't like my seam ripper.
I don't either.
I don't know if anyone does. I don't like my seam ripper. It frustrates me. I would not be able to get those out, and they would bug me, to be honest.
I would leave them in there.
Yes.
Even if they were bright red, I would just go, well.
And it's a lot. Especially if you're working on one of the larger quilts like Navigator, that's a lot of blocks to do.
It is.
And then have that show at the very end.
Right.
So this is then a block that I made using the water soluble thread for all those basting stitches. And you can see in that seam, it looks so much cleaner. You don't see any of that. I don't know if it was picked up on camera, but I can see some of the water soluble stitches in there up close and bright light. But if you want, you can just wash your quilt and they come right out, or you can dab it with a Q-tip and it comes right out. So the vanish light just dissolves really easily.
Yeah. And this is a 2,000 yard spool of vanish light, and also comes on a 300 yard spool, the smaller one.
Yes, which I believe those of you who got the starter kit, that came in the starter kit, was the 300. Aubrey, yell at me if I'm wrong. But, I believe the 300 yard spool came in the starter kit. So that's what you have if you ordered that and took advantage of that. Okay, we still have two more reasons to talk about water soluble thread. And one of those was that it reduces the bulk in the seams a little bit.
It does. So a lot of times you maybe are stitching over an area to tack down some fabric multiple times. And we always tell you, if it's on the edge, you're going to use that water soluble. So if you're going to do that multiple times and your thread's not dissolvable, then you're going to have a little bit of thread build up. And let's see, what was the other reason? I'm trying to think. Oh, in the beginning, and you'll see when Sarah stitches this block out, is your first step, you're going to put your water soluble thread in the needle, embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin. And for the first, sometimes 3, 4, sometimes the first 6 steps in a design, depending on the design, you're going to have water soluble thread throughout the whole, not the whole thing, but those just on the steps that we tell you.
Yeah.
And by doing it and leaving the water soluble in there, just it's fewer thread
Yeah,
changes. It's
which I
fewer-
really like.
I do too. I like to just keep going. I don't want to have to change a thread after
Yeah.
every step. So,
Right.
and you'll see that she does a placement stitch and the wool, and
For those steps
Yep.
that you're not going to see that thread, you know,
Right.
it's not adding any.
right. It's just holding temporarily holding it in place until we can do
Right.
another permanent stitch over the top
And
of it.
somebody said, I think it was Barb, said that she likes to use water soluble thread to make her Frankenback.
Oh, there you go.
So that is
Yeah.
really clever because
Yep.
no bulk in there,
That's right.
and that's a good idea.
That is a
So
good
thank
idea.
you for sharing that,
Yep.
Barb.
So I just wonder if they had any idea that there'd be so many uses for water soluble thread.
Okay, so if you live in a humid environment like Florida, which we don't really here in Ohio, it gets a little humid in the
No.
summer, but not too bad.
But typically we have air conditioning in the
Yeah.
summer, so
So if you live in Florida and it's really humid, how would you store your water soluble thread?
well, it comes in a plastic bag, and so I would definitely store it, keep it stored in that plastic bag. If you don't have it stored in a plastic bag, that humidity, since it's water soluble, could cause it to break easier when you're sewing. If you've had it for a long time and you just pull it out, because, oh, I think I have some of this, and maybe you bought it a few years ago, it could be age could also cause it to deteriorate. So if you're getting a lot of thread breakage while you're sewing with your Vanish Light water soluble thread, it could be the humidity. What was the last thing I just said? Could be the humidity, could be that it's older. And one of the other things could be that maybe you just need a little tension adjustment, loosen up your needle thread tension. So
yeah, because sometimes when we are doing lives and stuff, sometimes every once in a while someone will say that theirs breaks really easily. Now I use my machine as fast as it can
Yep.
go,
Yeah.
even with water soluble thread. And my water soluble thread in my machine, my experience is that it breaks as often as like a polyester thread.
Yeah.
So it's not very
Right.
often about the same, but sometimes people say it breaks easier.
Mhm.
So the things that we typically find that work for them are to play around with their tension a little bit and then also slow their machine
Yep,
down.
slow it down.
So those are two other tips.
Mhm.
If you are trying yours and you're going, it keeps breaking. Those
Yeah.
are the two things that we would do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So
What's next?
I think we should talk about the wool.
Okay, let's do it. We
We-
love wool.
We do love wool. So we have in our designs, you're going to hoop your battleizer, and in many of the designs, you have the option of adding another layer of wool. And the wool, what it does, is going to give your quilt block a little bit more dimension. And Sarah has some
do.
samples
I
of
wish.
doing it both ways here.
Yes. So this one has wool. I'm not sure if you guys can see that. I think you can, but the lighting, I have a little bit of a glare. So this, like I said, these blocks have wool. So you can see, especially in these feathered quilting areas, that there is a lot more loft in there. So I think it's really pretty. It really adds a nice effect to it.
It does, especially if you have your lighting in your house is hitting that. Oh my gosh, you can just see
Yes.
the dimensions so well. But there are some areas where maybe we would not recommend it, and it depends on what you're going to use your quilt for.
Right.
So if you're going to put it on your bed or hang it on the wall, you can use wool, and it's great. But if you're going to use it as like a table topper, and you're
Like
going to
on a
put
coaster or something.
right,
Yeah.
and you're going to put a vase or a glass or drink or something on it, you might want to skip the wool, because you
Right.
don't want anything teetering, a big old tall vase teetering on
Right.
top that extra wool that's
Right.
on there.
Okay, so we showed you the difference in samples. We talked about projects we wouldn't want to use wool in.
Mhm.
My preference is definitely to use wool if it's a wall hanging or something like that. The next question is, how do you prepare wool to use it in your machine? And I have a little example here. So this is a piece of wool that I first prepared by just cutting to size. So I follow my supply chart, cut it to the right size, and then I used my iron to press the edges so that they're nice and flat, less of a chance of that getting caught in the foot of your machine.
Yeah.
So that is how you'd prepare it. And then when you're tacking this down, another thing that you definitely want to keep in mind is that you want to raise your presser foot if you can do that on your machine. And I was actually talking to Annie before we started, because I was working on Mystery Quilt and I had one block that I had to stitch a few of, and I had a little pucker in one place and I didn't know why it was doing that. And then she finally came back one day and she was like, did you raise your presser foot? And I had not raised my presser foot. I did, and I restitched that block and I didn't have a pucker anymore.
Yeah.
So it is very important to raise your presser foot.
It is. It's very important. Now you're going to be demonstrating today on a machine that does not have the capability of raising your presser foot.
Right.
So she'll be walking you through what she's going to do to help that process be a little bit easier as well.
I'm going to, I think what we're going to do is stitch our basic block. So we're going to walk through that and kind of probably repeat some of the things that we've already said, because I always think that's good. So we're going to switch cameras around a little bit and check for Facebook comments, unless Aubrey can read some if she has questions or anything like that, and then we can answer those. So give us one moment and I'm going to stop this video. Annie, if you want to start that video.
Okay.
And unmute it.
So a couple things. I don't have my camera on, so hopefully it doesn't bounce. Okay, it's showing you. Perfect. Joni Sanderson says that light affects her water soluble thread, so she also makes sure the Ziploc is stored out of the light, away from the light, which is a good thing to do too. We also have had some questions about wool. If you want to talk a little bit about, it says, the question in particular I'm looking at says, is wool batting one loft, or should I ask for, say, a 1/4 inch loft wool? So that might be something to chat about. And then also just real quick, someone asked about, Joni also said she uses bamboo as a substitute to wool because she's allergic. Yep, and someone else said something about parchment paper is good for wool pressing too. So it sounds like we're getting some good tips from the audience as well.
We are. I'm gonna mute this here.
Hold on one second, Aubrey. We're getting a lot of feedback. Okay, sorry about that. Let me know if you can hear me, Aubrey. We were getting a little bit of feedback.
Yeah, it sounds a lot better now. You're good.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, so parchment paper to press the wool. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's what someone said that they do.
That's a really good tip. I had never thought of that.
Yep.
And then Joni said she keeps it away from light.
Yep. And then hold on, there was a qualifying question here and now I've lost it. Just a second.
Sorry.
No.
About the loft.
Yes. And I don't know that we necessarily, go ahead.
I believe on our website for our wool comes from Quilter's Dream. And I believe for our wool, it says anywhere from a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch loft is what it says on our website for the Quilter's Dream wool that we have.
Okay. Hopefully that helps you, Carlene.
Okay. So now we are over here at the machine. And like I said, I'm going to use the Frankenbath that I made, which is awesome. Use up those scraps. I hooped my battleizer in my machine. And when you look at your battleizer, there is kind of one side that is a little bit shinier. And that is typically the side that I put down. And I believe that that is kind of like the scrim of the stabilizer on that side. So we put that side down and the other side up. If you look at your battleizer and you go, I don't see what she's talking about, it's really fine. No need to worry about that. That's just one little tip. If you can kind of catch that side and put that down, it just helps the fabric cling to it a little nicer on the back. So what we're going to do is I've got my battleizer hooped. I'm going to do my first step now. And I have that water soluble thread in my needle. And the first step is going to sew the placement stitch. Okay, so now we're on step 2, and step 2 is an optional step. So this is where you'd want to decide, do I want to use the wool in this, or is this going to be a table topper or maybe a mug rug and I don't want to use wool? I'm going to go ahead and use the wool that, like I said, I pressed the edges to prepare. And if you can raise your presser foot, you'd want to do that right now. And I'll just align my wool in my placement stitch, and then still with the water soluble thread and the needle, we will sew a zigzag stitch to tack this down. Okay, now for step 3, you've got another decision to make. This decision would be, do I want to add my backing as I go, or do I want to back this in one piece later? And we'll cover backing much more extensively, I believe in week 3. We're going to go over all your options for that. But right now, just kind of decide what you want the look to be. And for this, I am going to add the backing fabric. So what you'll want to do is you'll take your hoop off your machine. I'm going to leave the design in the hoop, and I just turn my hoop right side down. I just align my backing fabric because on the back, I can see all those placement stitches. I'll just align that in the placement stitching and peek under each of those corners to make sure it's covering nicely. And you'll see how it clings nicely to that battleizer. Now I'm going to flip my hoop back over. And you're always going to want to kind of peek under there a little bit if you can. Make sure that your backing fabric stayed where you need it to be. And mine did. Woohoo. Okay, so for this step, we're also going to add the fabric on the front of the hoop, which I believe is called our background fabric. So same thing as adding that backing fabric. We'll just align that fabric on the front of the hoop, peek under each of those corners to make sure it's covering nicely. And then still with that water soluble thread and the needle and embroidery bobbin and the bobbin, we will sew the tack down. And I can't really talk while the machine is going because it's hard to hear me. So you'll see as I tack this down, I'll kind of use my fingers to guide that fabric a little, just like I did when I tacked down that wool batting. Okay, so for this block, because I have that backing fabric on the back of my hoop, I'm going to want to make sure that my bobbin and my needle, the thread on my bobbin and my needle match from here on out. So there's just one more step for this particular block. So I got to change both of those. So there's my bobbin. And then hopefully I can quickly thread my machine with everyone watching. And the reason you want to match your bobbin to the thread and the needle when I have that backing fabric on there is because we want the back to be really as beautiful as the front. Okay. Stick my hoop back on there. And now one of the other things that we want to do, and this is again because we have our backing fabric on the back of the hoop, we want to pull that bobbin thread to the top of our block. And that will help with any nesting on the back. So you get a really pretty back on the block. And then I'm also going to turn off the automatic thread cutter on my machine. So I always think of it as, if you want to add the backing block by block, there are 3 things you have to remember. You have to remember to match your bobbin to the thread and the needle. You have to remember to turn off your automatic thread cutter, and then also bring that bobbin thread to the top of your block. All right, and now we'll just sew this quilting. I'm gonna trim this thread.
Hey, Sarah.
Yes, ma'am.
Um, Wilma asked, and she's tuning in from, I believe, the Netherlands. So we've
Oh,
got,
really?
yeah. So she was saying that she uses a lot less battleizer hanging over the edge than you do, like maybe 1 to 2 inches max outside of the hoop. And she's wondering if that might be just a little too narrow.
No, I think as long it's this, so this, you know what, I'm gonna switch the cameras and then I'll answer that question if that's okay.
Yep. Sounds good.
Let's unmute this. Okay, so can you guys still hear me?
Yes, you're good to go.
Okay, so that's funny that you say that, Wilma, because before we started, this is just kind of like a sample piece of Frankenbat that I had made with scraps from a larger hoop that we had. And I almost cut this down a little bit because this is definitely more overhang than you actually need. If you have like an inch or sometimes even a half inch on the outside, as long as it's in your hoop securely, that's perfect.
Yeah, sometimes I'll even have mine going about quarter of an inch,
just so you can see it
just
a
so
little.
it's in your hoop and you'll be fine.
And like I said, I almost actually cut this down before the live.
But you didn't
but
want
it
her
works.
zigzag stitch to come
Yeah,
out.
and I didn't want to redo it. So that's why. So this is, and I'm sorry, I can't, when that machine is going, Zoom and Facebook work against us. They try to help us by canceling out the sound from the machine, but then when I speak, it just, you guys can't hear me. So
it doesn't work out.
I just had to stay quiet that whole time, which I'm not always good at, but so here is our block. And this is, again, we used wool in this one. And in this one, let's see if I can hold these. Yeah, you hold one.
Okay.
And the one that Annie's holding, there is no wool.
Am I in
Over
there?
here. Nope, now you are.
Okay.
In the one that Annie's holding, there is no wool. And in mine, there is. So let us know if you can kind of tell the difference on camera. I think it generally does actually show pretty well. So those are the differences visually. Yeah, you can see that on the camera. So that looks nice. So those are kind of the difference visually of what wool would look like. And I know, Aubrey, someone asked if they could use polyester or batting for the wool layer. And I know a lot of people use polyester that are allergic to wool.
Right,
correct?
right.
So yeah,
just don't get something that has a super, super high loft. You know, let's just keep it at like quarter of an inch to half an inch loft. And you have to probably going to want to make sure that, and I'm sure you can with polyester, so that you can press those edges to prepare for the zigzag to attach it to the battleizer.
Yeah. Aubrey, do you have other questions for us?
Yes. Tina from Ontario, she asked this in the Facebook group earlier today, and I don't know that we completely understood the question, but I think I'm getting it now.
Okay.
Is there a certain number of blocks that there should be stitching out this week? I know, like with your sample, you did 4. Maybe you could talk about.
So this block, I kind of leave it up to you guys for this block, because this block isn't actually used in this sample right here. And there's another layout in the fabric and thread key. Here's one example. This is the larger layout that's in the fabric and thread key. It also doesn't use the basic block. I just wanted to add the basic block into this course in case you really just found out who HoopSisters was and you have never done this before. Right. So Tina, this is really just kind of like, just to get your feet wet a little bit, which I think Tina's done some of our designs before. So if you want to stitch just one and then move on, that's perfectly fine. Or you can stitch 4 of them, and then in the future classes, we will join them together. But if you're looking to really make something like this, or like the larger layout that's in the fabric and thread key, you can just stitch one of these, or you can stitch none of them. It really is up to you. It's just a little extra block for you to work on.
Yep, just like you said, just to get your feet wet.
Yeah.
Introduce you to the water soluble, the wool, and all that stuff. So
You got anything else?
I don't really. I've answered a lot of questions as we went, but I think what's also is really cool is that you guys have contributed a lot of helpful hints too that work for you. And I just want to give a shout out to the community in here, because you guys are truly awesome. Like you're like, hey, I've tried this. This works good for me. And I've seen people comment on those posts saying, oh my gosh, that's so helpful. Thank you. So you're really learning from the best. You've got the OG Hoop Sister here, Annie, who's one half of the Hoop Sisters. And then you have Sarah here too. And then just an awesome community. So
You stole the words out of my mouth because I
Yeah.
was looking at the comments while that block was stitching. And I was going to say, they almost offered more tips in the
Right,
comments that
right.
were awesome.
they
So-
really did. They really did.
Assistant professors.
Yeah. Carolyn did just ask what size block you're doing, what size block you were stitching.
So I stitched out the 5-inch block today. So for size reference, let me get this folded up. This is our 5-inch block that I stitched. And then this is the sample that's made with the 8-inch block. So hopefully that kind of gives you, here's 2 5-inch blocks joined together too.
Perfect.
But yep, I
Okay.
stitched 5-inch today.
I have 2 other questions. I'm going to skip to the most important one. I might be joking, but it is, people want to know, what is the puppy's name?
Oh, yes. I think one of these Wednesdays I might bring him into work.
I told her to do that this morning. Bring the puppy in this morning because that's really what they want to see is the
I
puppy.
know. I mean, I do too.
He's so
Okay.
stinking cute. No, but go ahead, tell him the name. And then I actually have real questions too about sewing.
Okay, so we were tossing around a few names, but my husband and I got vetoed on every name we chose, and our 3-year-old ended up choosing the name, and so the puppy's name is Rascal.
And that was really cute because he just started calling him, here, come here, Wascal, come here, Wascal. I'm like, I
We're
guess
like,
that's
he's
his
not
name.
Rascal, but
He is now.
he rules our world, so that's
Yeah.
fine. He's
Yeah.
Rascal now.
That's right. All right. And then I did have a question from Michelle. She wants to know, when do you wash out your water soluble thread?
That is a good question. So I would not wash it out until your blocks are joined together. And honestly, I wouldn't even do it until you are completely done and your blocks are joined, your sashing is on if you need sashing on it, and your binding is on. And then what we typically do is we throw our quilts in the wash, run them on, I think, a gentle
Yep,
cycle.
gentle cycle, cold water, rinse.
You don't need any detergent or
Right,
anything, just
right,
water,
just get it wet,
and then lay it
lay
flat
it
to
flat
dry.
to dry. And I don't, well, I probably have floor space, but I just lay it on the bed and
Yeah.
then turn the ceiling fan on and halfway through the day, flip it over. And by the end of the day, it's all dry and,
Yeah.
and your thread's gone.
Yep.
So,
So at the very, very end, last thing
Yep.
you do.
All right. And then Karen says she's looking forward to returning home to Canada so she can finally play on her embroidery machine. I also have a
Awesome.
question from Andrea. Can you give some tips or tricks to solve issues when they occur? Like perhaps when there is a thread issue on your machine and you need to rethread the machine in the middle of quilting.
So I mean, we've definitely all had that happen
Mhm.
before, right? Annie might have better tips than I do, but I normally, if I have to rethread like in the middle of quilting the
Mhm.
block that we were just working on, I would clean up my block a little bit, rethread my machine, and then I would go back like 10 or 12 stitches
right, right.
and then start it.
Yep.
So that's I don't
Yep.
know if you do anything different.
I do that too. Now, sometimes when you do that, it might look really
A
thicker.
little more bold. Yeah.
Right, and during that stitching area. So if that's the situation, it's really bothering me, I might actually pull some stitches out with my seam ripper to a point where it's at a starting point where you won't know. But I would always back up a few stitches unless you're starting at the very beginning. Back up a few stitches and just start sewing it.
I took this from you because that
Okay.
actually happened to me when I was stitching this block. The machine didn't like what I did for some reason. So right along this line, I don't know if you can tell that there might be, there's thread in there that looks a little bit thicker in
Thicker?
one part, but it's probably actually kind of hard to see unless you're the person
Mhm.
that did it. I
Yep.
think it's typically what I
But
find.
you know what?
Just don't point it out and you'll be fine.
Exactly. And that's the hard thing because usually when you make a quilt, a true quilter is gonna go, oh, well, I had a little boo-boo right here, but
But no
it's-
one knows unless you point it
don't
out.
do that. It's hard to
Unless-
stop doing that.
Unless you are filming a tutorial on So somebody requested that I make a tutorial for adding a sleeve and a binding to the quilt as part of Quilt-In-The-Hoop. And I did. And when I was filming the tutorial, I put the sleeve on the bottom of the wall hanging, and it had wall hanging was full of springs. So it's very directional.
Yes,
So
very
we got
much so.
we got a good laugh out of that. That
Yep.
mistake you certainly noticed.
Yep, I have a picture of it hanging upside down
Yes.
too, in case anyone needs it.
Yeah,
Just let me know.
we'll have to share it with you guys one day.
So did you
So the tip
refilm
on
your,
adding sleeve is to make sure you're adding it to the top of your
Yes,
quilt.
yes.
so did you have to refilm your whole tutorial then for the course?
Nope, I did not, but I did fix where the sleeve was located.
There you go. All right. And then I know we talked about block size in the one you were stitching. Did you mention the size behind you? Someone asked about that.
This is the 8-inch block size.
Thank you.
And I do believe if you look in the fabric and thread key, if I can find the right page. Yes, if you look in the fabric and thread key, it does tell you, approximate finish sizes for it. So this one is the 8-inch and it is about 31 by 31.
Okay.
And the other layout, like I said, there will be finish sizes for everything in that
Perfect.
fabric and thread key.
Okay. And then this is a question I don't think I've heard before. Does the iron dissolve the thread? I'm assuming they mean wash the water soluble thread.
Well, if you use a lot of steam, it will, but the other thing it will, and I'm thinking you're going to talk about pressing, unless you want to talk about it now with the strip stick. If you're using steam, it will dissolve it sometimes. It may still have a little left, but actually dabbing a little bit of water with the Q-tip will get rid of all of it. But you also have to keep in mind that when you're pressing your seams, if you use wool, the heat from the iron, just like when you prepped the edges, could flatten your wool. So if anyone is familiar with what a strip stick is, yeah, hopefully we still have it out. But there's this little item Sarah's going to bring us to show you called a strip stick. And it's really a good idea when you're pressing your seams, only if you've used wool, that you use this little item. And that way you put your seam of your blocks right over the top of that. So your iron is only touching your seam. That way you're not totally rooting the whole reason for the wool and smashing
And you said if you don't have a strip stick, you can use a rolling pin.
Rolling pin. If someone's a clothing maker and they have a ham or some of these other items, I don't know what that is. Not smoked
like
pork,
Easter?
nothing like that. No. But a strip stick, rolling pin. Before I got my strip stick, I had a rolling pin in here and it worked great. But that way you're only pressing the seams, which you've already flattened anyway to get the wool attached to your battleizer. So that'll keep it from smashing all your wool that you put in there.
Okay. I have two more things real quick. Number one, can you show the back of the block?
Of the block that I just stitched. That's a good idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm using a fabric that has stripes in it, and it is difficult to see on here. I'll have Annie hold this up and show you, and I'll go grab another example that has more of a solid fabric so you can see it.
Okay, so that is the back of her block. Hopefully you guys can see that. And it's not too hard to see with the stripes. And I don't know if this one, if they can see it any better, probably not. But there it is. And she's got some others here. That's the back.
So
Sarah?
this is the back. And this is the block that we'll be stitching out next week together. And
Yeah,
I think
shows up a lot better on the light fabric.
yeah. And that's another thing to keep in mind. And like I said, we'll cover backing options in week 3. But another thing to keep in mind when you're choosing whether to add backing fabric as you go or add it in one larger portion at the end, I think that kind of depends on the backing fabric that you're using. Because if you're using a backing fabric like this one, it's not going to show up quite as much as something that's a little more solid. So with something that's darker or has a lot more of a print to it, I might back in one larger section.
Right.
If you've got more of a solid fabric, I think that lends itself better, in my opinion. It's just my opinion.
I agree.
Lends itself better to backing as you go.
Mhm.
All right, I've got one more and then we can shut it down for the day.
Okay.
You guys have asked some awesome questions and we will be back again, by the way, next Wednesday too, but keep the questions coming. So Teresa asked, and it sounds to me like she's maybe opening the files in her software, but I'm going to leave it up to you smart people to answer this question. She says, hi ladies, love the Hoop Sisters designs. Question about the download. There are several files with the design all labeled 5 basic. They all open with artistic digitizer. Each file is a different size. Which file should we use or does it matter? Could not find the Jeff. So I think maybe just opening it in a different spot, but I'm going to let you guys maybe look into that or answer that one.
If Teresa wants to give us a call or maybe email Sarah at HoopSisters,
Yes.
SARAH at HoopSisters.com. And that way Sarah can sit at her computer and try and figure out exactly, what her question is. We don't want to guess at it right here on the live and tell
because
her
when you look at like the file structure, there should be a Jeff folder that you can go into, and everything in that folder should be Jeff files. So
okay,
we'll figure it out.
Typing that in there. Typing that in there now, so you have Sarah's email. And someone asked, can I still jump in on this? Of course you can. If you go to hoopsisters.com, there's a tab at the top left that says QITH 101. It's just $32.99. Is that right, Sarah?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
So $32.99.
Sorry, you get all the files to make this, as well as the file for the block that we stitched today. And then you also get all the course guides plus the fabric and thread key, which is, I think those combined is like over 50 pages of material.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, you can still jump in on that because this is the very first class, and we will also be emailing this recording out. So yay, we did it. The first Quilt-In-The-Hoop 101 class, guys. How you feel about it?
I feel good, but hopefully everyone joining us feels good too.
That's right.
I know. Alrighty. Next week we're going to be working on that stitch and flip block. Next week will probably be a little bit of a quicker class. It's going to kind of be a preview of the 3 major things that we talked about today. And then we're going to build upon that basic block with the stitch and flip block. So cool. That'll be another fun one.
It will.
All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next Wednesday from a brand new live space.
That's right.
We moved this weekend, so we'll see you with maybe a brand new background.
Let's hope so.
All right. Bye, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.